Number 8. Craig Thomas. In what a judge later described as the worst domestic abuse he had ever seen, a Welsh woman named Charlotte Rooks was put through unimaginable horror by her ex-boyfriend, Craig Thomas. Back in 2013, Thomas was sentenced to 10 years in prison for beating Rooks with hammers, stabbing her, forcing her to sleep naked and standing up, making her eat photographs and jewelry of her deceased loved ones, and inflicting other torture on her. According to a police inquiry, law enforcement visited the former couple's flat repeatedly while Rooks was trapped. South Wales officers allegedly failed to grasp the severity of the situation, and the agency later issued a formal apology to the young woman. But it didn't exactly heal the physical and emotional scars that Rooks is still healing from to this day. Thomas was released in 2019 after serving half his sentence, but was quickly sent back to prison for violating his parole. He was freed again in 2023 after serving his full sentence, and he's banned from setting foot in the city of Cardiff, where Rooks currently lives. Prior to being released a second time, he sought to suppress the news by taking certain legal measures, but the court rejected his request for a gag order. Rooks remains fearful that Thomas will disobey the rules that are being put forth to protect her. She told the Daily Mail that she feels she is in danger given her ex's history of breaching the terms of his release. Even more troubling, she was not told where Thomas was living when she was informed of his release. For now, she's hoping to continue running a non-profit that takes care of pets for survivors fleeing abusive relationships. But it's understandably difficult to do at a time when she's sleeping with one eye open and constantly looking over her shoulder. Number 7. The Cookie Monster Killer. In September 2020, a 43-year-old Australian woman named Rebecca Payne fatally poisoned her husband, 68-year-old Noel Payne, with cookies that were laced with a heavy dose of sleeping medication. She then duct-taped Noel's body in a blanket and stuffed him into a freezer, most likely while he was still alive. Rebecca then went on a spending spree with her deceased husband's credit card. When people noticed that Noel was missing, Rebecca claimed that he had abandoned the home, but her story failed to hold up, and his body was discovered shortly thereafter. What Rebecca did was unacceptable under the standards of any civilized society. But there are two sides to every story, and her attorney argued in court that she was the victim of horrific abuse at the hands of Noel. According to Rebecca's lawyer, the couple split up in 2012 and reconciled the following year, but Noel refused to break up with a woman he had started seeing during the breakup. In fact, the other woman continued to live with the Paynes right up until the night of Noel's death. Rebecca was convicted of murder, despite her claims that Noel abused her. She was sentenced to 16 years in prison with the requirement that she serve at least 10 years behind bars before becoming eligible for parole. Number 6. Aaron Uchal. A young mother from Atlanta, Georgia named Prosper Ortega endured days of unimaginable hell in 2016 when she was held captive and tortured at the hands of her husband, Aaron Uchal. The 23-year-old had given birth just 2 weeks earlier when Uchal struck her in the face repeatedly, hitting her so hard that he broke the orbital bone around one of her eyes. Uchal also seriously injured his wife's legs. Prosper's mother, Fawn, discovered the horrific situation when she became worried after not hearing from her daughter and went to check on the young woman. Fawn later told the press that she had recently begun suspecting Uchal of isolating her daughter. When Uchal refused to let her into the house, she fought her way in. The moment she saw Prosper's face, Fawn called the police. By then, Prosper's injuries were so severe that she couldn't open her eyes. She was rushed to a nearby hospital, where she underwent surgery and was reunited with her baby. Uchal admitted to hitting Ortega a couple of times, according to police, but the evidence spoke for itself, and he was arrested and held without bond. Meanwhile, Prosper began her lengthy road to recovery, which included multiple operations over the following 2 years. Uchal ultimately pleaded guilty to 4 counts of aggravated battery, 2 counts of aggravated assault, 1 count of false imprisonment, and 1 count of influencing a witness. He's in prison and will reportedly remain behind bars for many years. Number 5. Craig Lester Thrift. 23-year-old Terry Eugene Rouse disappeared after attending a party in Waycross, Georgia in 1991. His car was later found abandoned in a swamp with the engine running, the radio on and the windows rolled down. Some of his personal belongings were left inside the vehicle. At first, police assumed that Terry had skipped town due to his mounting drug and debt problems, but they began to rethink their theory after learning that Terry had had an affair with Rhonda Thrift, the wife of his first cousin and best friend, Craig Lester Thrift. Rhonda and Craig divorced after Terry's disappearance. The case remained a mystery for the next 2 decades. At some point, it became clear that Terry was probably never going to return home. He was presumed dead, and the case was closed due to a lack of evidence. Investigators had lingering suspicions of foul play, and the case was eventually reopened. In 2012, they narrowed their sights on Thrift, who not only gave Terry a ride to work on the day he went missing, but also refused to take a lie detector test years earlier. And while Terry's remains were never recovered, authorities decided they had enough evidence to finally move forward with a murder charge against Craig. At the time of his arrest, Craig was married to his second wife, Robin Barry. Robin later told the ID Channel series Evil Lives Here that her marriage to Craig began peacefully enough, but became increasingly abusive over time. She claimed that Craig repeatedly mentioned killing Terry and dumping his body in the swamp. And while Robin initially brushed off Craig's claims, she eventually began to realize that her husband was 100% serious. But for a while, she was afraid to speak up because Craig allegedly threatened to kill her if she said anything. When it came down to it, however, she was willing to testify against Craig, who was convicted in 2014 of killing Terry and sentenced to 7 years to life in prison. According to records, he remains behind bars for the time being. Number 4. Lara Paige Conley. One unfortunate family from Independence, Kentucky learned the hard way that not all domestic violence situations occur between intimate partners. Growing up, Lara Paige Conley always seemed to have an unusually high need for attention and a disrespect for the rules. And she never outgrew these traits, according to her older sister, Ginger Coates, who told the ID Channel series Evil Lives Here that Paige only became more volatile and demanding with age. In Ginger's words, something was just rotten inside. Instead of pursuing a career and moving out on her own, Paige lived with her mother, Carlene, well into her adulthood. She was verbally abusive toward Carlene, who told Ginger that she felt obligated to take care of Paige, and the abuse allegedly turned physical at some point. Tensions reached a boiling point in 2015 when Paige became enraged over her mother's choice of food to cook for a birthday dinner. What began as a verbal argument escalated to violence, and at some point Paige grabbed a knife from a butcher block and began stabbing Carlene. She plunged the blade into her mother dozens of times until Carlene went limp and died. Paige told the police a number of different stories, all of which made little to no sense considering the circumstances at hand. She even tried to accuse Carlene of attacking her first, even though Paige's mother had no history of being violent toward her children. Needless to say, a jury found Paige guilty of murder. She was sentenced to 27 years in prison and will be 66 years old when she is freed. Ginger made her feelings clear during Paige's sentencing hearing when she described her sister as ugly and sick to the marrow of her bones. Number 3. David Schaer. In January 2018, first responders in Salem, Ohio were called to the home of a retired law enforcement officer named Delbert Schaer by his live-in son, David, who claimed that he had found his father unresponsive. The senior citizen's death initially appeared to be natural, but a medical examiner concluded that he had been bludgeoned to death. Delbert was a man of the law, but David was a different story. In fact, at the time, David was on parole for burglary and theft-related charges. He had a violent past, so police were quick to suspect him of being the killer. Based on the evidence, investigators theorized that David attacked Delbert and left him to die instead of calling for help. David even allegedly tried to clean the crime scene before dialing 911. When questioned about why he didn't immediately call for help, David allegedly told police that he initially called a friend who was a nurse. He claimed that the friend came over and checked on Delbert with a stethoscope, yet he couldn't remember the friend's name. Detectives soon discovered that David had recently stolen his father's entire gun collection, which only added to their growing suspicions. David claimed that he had given the guns away, but most of them were found hidden in a secret room that was blocked off by a table and a stack of books. Authorities charged Davis with murder, tampering with evidence, and a weapon-related count. During an interview with the ID Channel series Evil Lives Here, David's stepmother, Deborah Williamson, said that her stepson's behavioral problems dated back to childhood. She described David as manipulative and defiant and claimed that he had threatened her in the past. David ultimately pleaded guilty to a reduced first-degree manslaughter charge in exchange for a 14-year prison sentence. During his sentencing hearing, he said that he loved his father, that he wasn't a violent person, and that he misses Delbert every day. He claimed that Delbert's death was a tragic accident, but prosecutors saw it differently, describing him as a violent ex-con who ungratefully beat his father to death after being taken in when he had nowhere else to go. Number 2. Jesse Winck. One night in 2007, 22-year-old Amy Chesler became concerned because she couldn't reach her mother, Hadis Winck, during her drive home from work. The recent college graduate only became more worried when she called her brother, 25-year-old Jesse Winck, who told her not to come home. Jesse hung up, so Amy kept calling until he picked up the phone again. When she asked her brother what was going on, Jesse said he had killed their mother. Shocked and sickened by what she had just heard, Amy dialed 911 and reported the situation as she rushed home. The dispatcher warned her not to go inside in case the killer was still in the house, but she was so desperate to get to her mother that she didn't listen. Amy entered the house to find Hadis laying motionless and face down in a pool of blood with a knife sticking out of her shoulder. Amy would later reveal that Jesse abused her and their mother for at least 10 years leading up to the murder. He killed Hadis with a kitchen knife simply because she asked him to clean up after himself after he made himself a sandwich. Despite admitting to his crime shortly afterward, Jesse fought the charges against him for murdering his mother. It took for years for prosecutors to secure a conviction, and he received a sentence of just 15 years to life. According to a Change.org petition to keep Jesse in prison past the 15 years, his violent tendencies have only worsened since his incarceration began. In fact, at his parole hearing, he allegedly threatened to kill all his surviving family members. Thankfully, the parole board decided not to free him. He was subsequently convicted of a handful of new charges for crimes he's committed in prison, and his sentence was lengthened significantly. Number 1. Gene Kidle. 58-year-old Lyle Eugene Kidle and his wife Diane had a tumultuous marriage. They even separated at one point, but they made a renewed effort to save their relationship, presumably for the sake of their children. One evening in 1966, the couple left their 4 kids at their home in Phoenix and went out. The next morning, the kids woke up to find their father asleep on the couch, but their mother was nowhere to be found. Kidle filed a missing persons report but didn't seem overly concerned about Diane's absence. A few months later, the Kidles' home burned down, killing 2 family members and severely injuring another. Authorities ruled the fire as suspicious but declined to file any criminal charges. In 1993, nearly 30 years later, Gene and Diane's grown daughter, Lori Romanek, wrote a shocking letter to the police claiming that she saw her father striking her mother on the head on the night Diane went missing. Lori also remembered seeing Gene digging a hole in the backyard later that night while her mother lay crumpled and motionless on the ground. Gene forbade the kids from playing in the yard for several months and later covered it over with concrete. After receiving Lori's letter, police dug up the yard and found Diane's skeleton and some of her clothing. Finally, almost 3 decades after Diane went missing, the mystery was solved. Gene Kidle was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, bringing this horrific chapter of his family's lives to a long-awaited end. He maintained his innocence from behind bars until his death in 2004 at the age of 68 years old. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be locked in a closet for a week or have all your fingernails ripped off? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.